Hi guys, and welcome back to our series on fascinating firearms from the Royal Armouries collection. This one you might have seen before. It's pretty, I think esoteric is the word. This is the Yatimatic, spelt with a J, and that will be my only attempt at Finnish pronunciation in this video. Oh, not quite actually, because I do have to tell you who designed this. So this was designed by a Yatimatic. Apologies, as always, to speakers of the language. Late 70s, early 80s, it went into production in 1983. This was designed by Mr. Tamari as a PDW, really, personal defense weapon, in the sense of a compact, concealable, potentially, or otherwise just very handy weapon for police, security forces, tank crews, anyone that needs a compact, fully automatic, pistol caliber firearm. When I say pistol caliber, it is 9mm parabellum, although in this rather weird notation system, it's 9.00 and then para for parabellum. I don't quite get why they did that. So that's, I believe, a play on the designer's name, and automatic, because it is. And then made in Finland, for obvious reasons, and a serial number. So 4870 is our earliest Yatimatic. As you can see, we are blessed with 4 of these things. One was already in the Royal Armouries collection when we acquired the UK Ministry of Defence Pattern Room collection, which had 3. But they are all different, and I will run through them all and explain why. This isn't just a flex to show you how many Yatimatics we have. Basic design, as you can probably see, it is a stamped steel construction. It's not, as you might imagine, a flat stamping that's then folded into shape like an MP5, like most stamped steel guns. This is a 2-part, so it's just 2 sides stamped into shape with the reinforcing ribs designed into the stamping, pressing, and then welded together at the front and the rear. You can see the seam and the weld mark. Same for the top cover, that is sheet metal as well. 2 different forms of that, I'll show you in a second. Various bits of fairly cheaply made metal componentry, and then polymer. So the lower receiver, or the trigger mechanism housing if you're British, glass reinforced polymer, such as was becoming not common but accepted in the early 80s. Same for the folding grip, and it's not just a folding grip, it is a cocking handle, as we'll get to in a second. Of course, the magazine is constructed from sheet steel. It is a proprietary design, but it's very reminiscent of the Tech 9 magazine. You've seen me fold down the cocking handle and front grip because it is supposed to be both. So you pull it down, you pull it to the rear to cock, and amusingly, the big red fire flag shows up on here. And you would turn the handle to the front, and then of course with the magazine fitted, you would grasp it like this. They show this in the manual, in fact, and you push-pull and get your head behind the sights. So this is why I call it a machine pistol, because it's almost like firing a pistol with 2 hands, more so than a submachine gun. So the cocking handle is also the front grip. Not super sturdy, has to be said. It will fold up, hence why that push-pull is very important, and your fingers are worryingly close to the muzzle. Speaking of the muzzle, the big elephant in the room here is how wonky this gun is. Which, if you know anything about the Yatimatic, is a design feature. When you pull the trigger, kadunk, you get that classic open bolt submachine gun / machine pistol forward clunk before it would then blow back to, well, either the firing position for semi-auto, or it would continue to fire, of course, if it was firing an automatic. This one has no selector switch. This is a progressive trigger. So slight trigger pull for semi-automatic, all the way to the rear, basically drops everything out of the way, disconnects the disconnector, and allows the bolt to run until the gun's empty. The whole idea of this was to control muzzle rise. The main force is up. Everything recoiling to the impulse of the bullet firing, and then the working parts coming to the rear tends to, well, in this case, pivot your wrist and raise the muzzle. Now that first gun, or 3 of these guns, produced by, and I won't attempt the pronunciation, but the abbreviation for the company name is TAO. So they produced the Yatimatic between 1983 and 1986. The one we don't have on the table is the version produced by the amusingly named Golden Gun Company. And in fact, they had a gold-plated with a white kind of ivory effect lower receiver on it, used in their promotional material. But we don't have one made by that company. So what we have here are 3 variants of the original TAO made gun. You've seen the earliest. Then we have this one. Both of these still have the early type rear sight. So it's a polymer rear sight, much like what you see on a Glock. And it is a part of the lower receiver. So this lower receiver goes up and between the 2 plates of steel, and the sight pops up in there. You'll see this when we take one apart properly, but that's the first pattern of rear sight. These are all minor changes that happen. Slightly higher serial number, and this one is fitted with the optional, what I believe to be the first version of the threaded barrel for a silencer or suppressor, which you will see on the next example. So nothing too altered about this. It's maybe a little less nicely put together, being from like later in the production run, but that's debatable. Now, where it gets a bit more interesting, if you like your nerdy details on these things, is this one. And this is the one that we used in a silhouette teaser a while back. Those of you who noticed that was in fact a Yatimatic, and it was one with a sound suppressor fitted. So this is 5219. So this is the latest TAO made, Finnish made Yatimatic that we have. Going from the rear here, the rear sight has changed quite dramatically. It's no longer a pistol combat style notch made out of polymer. It is now a more submachine gunny aperture rear sight made out of sheet steel, and it is integral. If I just pop down the latch there, it is integral to the latch. So it's part of the same steel stamping, turned up and pierced with a hole. So for whatever reason, they decided that was a better way to do a rear sight. The pattern of the top cover has altered. So if we show early in my right hand, your left, with the big angle on the front of it, that's what you'll see in most pictures of a Yatimatic. And then this one has been simplified for ease of production, and it just has a continuous angle here. Call it the humpback version if you like, because it does make it quite a pronounced angle. And again, this speaks to the internal design of this thing, with the bolt running at an angle to the barrel. The other major change, well, first of all, sort of another elephant in the room here is the 40-round magazine. We had 20 and 40-round magazines available for the Yatimatic. We'll get that out of the way because it does get in the way. The sound suppressor. Different pattern of sound suppressor barrel with this sort of reduced profile section in it that wasn't on the earlier version. Not sure of the design theory there. Perhaps it's to clear the knuckle so that the hot suppressor doesn't burn your knuckle. Not entirely sure. And the other major change is it has a fire selector on the left-hand side. 1 shot, 3 shots, except it's not 3 shots. That's just shorthand for automatic. So semi-automatic, automatic. And this thing is kind of a bit of a kludge design, but I have to say the trigger mechanism is really neat. So we'll we'll give you a bit of a look at that in a moment. The suppressor, I'm not entirely sure if these were made in-house, designed and made in-house. I have assumed that they were, but if anyone knows different, let us know. Simply threaded on as normal with a silencer. And for those suppressor fans amongst you, it is readily strippable. I just want to show you the pattern of baffles that are in here. So it's a baffle stack, quite a modern design, and each of these baffles has an angled plate with a hole in it for the bullet to pass through, and each one is at a different angle as you go down the stack. I won't take them all out because I'll be here forever putting them back correctly. They're all keyed so that they stack together. Seems like quite a good design for a sound suppressor to me. The final one that we have here, and I don't know if you can notice a difference here. So we're going back to the old style of top cover, non-threaded barrel. That's not really relevant. The pistol grip is quite a different shape here, and that's indicative of, well, as it turns out, a completely different manufacturer. Same for the rear sight. We don't have the polymer sight sticking up from the lower, and we don't have one built into the disassembly lever slash sling loop. That's what this is, by the way. Not a great design, but nonetheless. Instead, it's a separate piece of sheet steel with a notch in it this time, going back to the old pattern of sight, but it is spot welded onto the top of the top cover. So 3 different rear sights. While I remember the Golden Gun Company variant, one of the only ways in which it differs from a late version TAO gun is that this sling loop is removed. They've realized that if you pull on this, it disassembles your gun. And so they just cut that off at the back, and they put a pivoting sling swivel on what is now a cross pin on those guns. So if you ever see one without the loop on the back, it will be a GG95 PDW, which is what the gun was rebranded as. And that was in the mid-80s, well, post-1986. So on the side, we have 9x19 para, obvious meaning there, and Norinco China. Well, I'm sure many of you who know your guns know Norinco, North China Industries, one of China's major kind of state-owned arms factories / companies. In fact, it's a whole series of factories that supply the Norinco company. Norinco is the company. And then Alpha 0007. So really early. I can't confirm at the moment because I haven't got hold of any paperwork precisely how we got this, but somehow we've ended up with what appears to be a very early production example of the Chinese copy of the Yatimatic. I mean, I didn't even know that there was a Chinese copy of the Yatimatic until relatively recently. The Chinese arms industry has copied almost everything, so I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but this is such an unusual niche firearm, it's still a surprise to me that the Chinese did copy it. It's really badly made, unfortunately. So we have what I think is a production mistake here of some sort, where something has been part of the construction of the receiver. There's a rivet just about visible there, or a pin, has been ground away. It's actually the mounting point for this trigger mechanism removal disassembly screw. So this screws into that circular plate. So they've cocked that up and then they've ground it off and fairly professionally finished it over the top. You can really see the grind marks there. But it isn't just that. We've shown you how this works. You can't get the lever down for love nor money. You have to disassemble this thing to pop out the front grip cocking handle. So we can't even cock it, we can't even check it clear, which we have done before filming. And then, well, that's far from ideal, suboptimal, you might say. It's worse than you think because you can't even take it down. You can't disassemble it without the use of a nice nylon hammer, which is what we had to use to bash this down to then open the gun and bash down the cocking handle. So this is essentially an unfinished example of the gun. If you sold this, it would be sent back. So I'm sure there's an interesting story behind this one. Right, so by the magic of film production, we have a clear table and just our earliest Yatimatic, and I want to show you the inside of this because it is critical to why it exists in the first place. So of course we remove our magazine, first of all, get that out of the way. Now, disassembly, as I believe I mentioned, is this lever. Pop that down, up comes your top cover, which on this one is rather loose, so it flops around, whacks you in the knuckles, that kind of thing. It's not meant to be that loose, and that stays where it is. You can remove that, but you wouldn't want to for sort of cleaning purposes. And then we can actually, let me just pop down the cocking handle. Before we fully take this apart, let me just quickly show you. So I have to hold this in place because one of the jobs of the top cover on this gun is to keep the bolt running on its rails. So I'll put my thumb there and then pull this to the rear, get a slightly better idea of what was happening when we were cocking it. And you can see how much of a telescoped bolt this is. I'll explain that when I remove it. So we then remove the recoil spring and guide rod, and we should then be able to remove the bolt. There is your bolt. It has a separate firing pin assembly in here that can be removed for replacement, which is quite a good bit of design, because with a fixed firing pin, so this is open bolt operation, starts back here, pull the trigger, slams forward, picks up a round, fires it, and then blows back. With that system of operation, you have a fixed firing pin. If that wears away or happens to break, you then have to throw the whole bolt away and replace it. Well, not with this, because you get a screwdriver in there, pop out this bit, order away for a replacement, and insert that in there. This cutout is obviously for ejection, so that there is no metal in the way when the cartridge case comes flying out, and it lines up with the ejection opening here. Now this one's taken quite a lot of impact damage, which I assume is from some very aggressive case ejection, but I'm not entirely sure. It's not on our other examples. Otherwise, this is a single machining. As noted, it's heavily telescoped, meaning the bolt face that would normally be up here is all the way back here, and it wraps over the barrel. So this is similar to the Uzi, famously, has a telescoped bolt, as in it telescopes shut around the barrel, if you think of it that way. In fact, if we remove the barrel, which is retained in place by the top cover, by these flats and by these rings, you can see what I mean. So the barrel, at the moment of firing, we have this arrangement. And you'll notice the angle there. So the two ways in which we know this works, for sure, are firstly by having a lot of, or having the center of gravity in front of the pivot point of the wrist, if that makes sense. So that the torque of recoil, if you don't have a wrist like Arnold Schwarzenegger, will inevitably torque your wrist upwards and the muzzle will go high and your shots will go high. Well, part of the idea here is that all the mass you can possibly put in front of the wrist, in front of the hand, is there. So although the bolt does come back all the way to there, at no point is a substantial amount of mass behind your wrist. So in theory, that keeps the muzzle down. The other mechanism that's at play here has to do with that rakish, jaunty angle that the barrel is at. So roughly like that. And that means that when you line the sights up, the barrel is parallel to the target, of course, because it has to be, and the bolt is pointing upwards. And then as this thing slams shut, fires at that point, and then it recoils back and up. back and up, and it is diverging away from the bore line, from the line of fire. What does that do? Well, think of the classic sort of astronaut in space situation. You throw an object away from you. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That makes you drift slightly away from where you threw that object. It's the same basic kind of schoolboy physics going on here, as I understand it, as a basic schoolboy, which is that the mass departing from the bore line is putting force downwards. So by having the bolt go away at an angle, you get a push, you get the muzzle pushed down. Now, so those are the two ways in which we're pretty happy that this works. So the designer, presumably, described this as such. This gun is based on a new patented construction idea with which the tendency of the recoil force which lifts the muzzle has been eliminated almost 100%. This is where it slightly diverges from my explanation. At the same time, the bolt presses against the bottom of the receiver, thus pushing the whole gun downwards. So it's implied that it's the action of the bolt against the rails inside this sheet metal construction that is physically pushing the whole gun downwards. Now, the patent drawing does depict this design of gun. It is a Yatimatic. However, the bolt as shown in the drawing for the patent has an additional ventral angle, if I can put it that way. So a steep ramp on the bottom of the bolt, and then inside the receiver, somewhere in the drawing, we'll show you that, is an equivalent ramp. And so as soon as the bolt started to move backwards, it would be actively deflecting the gun downwards. So in other words, it wouldn't just be the line of departure from the bore line that's deflecting the gun, or the pressure on the rails as it recoils. It would be actively using two angled surfaces to thrust the gun downwards. So the bolt is thrusting the gun downwards. Now that is not in the final design. That has been eliminated entirely, but it is described in the patent and it is shown on the drawings. So either Timari discovered that you didn't need that steep angle, extra bit of machining and complication, or they just, for whatever production reason, they eliminated that. One other thing I wanted to show you guys is the trigger mechanism in here, because it's incredibly compact and neat. Now, the manual does warn you that your disconnector may fall off, which it hasn't in this case. So trigger is held to the rear because you're firing away on automatic, and your sear is down so the bolt can move unimpeded back and forth, firing away. Bolt comes back and on semi-automatic, i.e. Only pulling the trigger a short way, which is there. So the sear is down. Back of the bolt hits the disconnector and pop, up comes the sear. So the next time the bolt tries to come forward, it hangs up on there and you're ready for your next shot. Pull the trigger for the next shot. An unusual design, it's safe to say. This was trialled at least once by the Finnish Defence Forces, possibly twice. Rejected, never brought into service with them. No other armed service or police force has adopted this as far as we know. Probably not that many more than, ours go up to 5,100 something. I doubt if more than 6,000 were ever produced. If anyone has a nice high serial number, let us know. It sort of has a fascinating parallel existence in popular culture. It's not a big video game gun. It shows up in an online shooter called Crossfire from 2007. I think that's it. And if you know this gun, other than being someone who's into your interesting firearms, it's from the film Cobra with Sylvester Stallone, because he has a version of it, a bit like our suppressed version, but with the other optional massive 80s laser sight across the top of it, which makes it look really sci-fi. And there's the famous poster / VHS cover with him in his aviators holding his Yatimatic with a visible laser poking up out of the laser emitter. It's also in Red Dawn, weirdly, posing as a Soviet firearm that they couldn't get. So they could get an obscure Finnish firearm, but they couldn't get the Soviet gun that they wanted, for obvious reasons in the Cold War. And it's in a couple of other movies, apparently as product placement by the Finnish company that was pushing it, which is rather fascinating. So I guess loaned to the productions and then came back because they don't survive in movie armories in the States, and there are precious few elsewhere as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. Bit of a deeper dive into a real, so it's almost like a meme gun, really, but it was a real attempt to create a controllable machine pistol / personal defense weapon. Thanks for watching, guys. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to support us in other ways, well, we have got our social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And over there, you can play along with our What Is This Weapon every week. Those teasers, if you like, do tie into this video series, but you're just as welcome to watch the series on its own as well. And of course, any other content that we put up on the Royal Armouries YouTube channel. And of course, the usual like and subscribe, that would be great. If you'd like to donate to us, you can find out how to do that from a link in the description. You can even become a member of the Royal Armouries as well, also in the description. But most of all, thanks for watching. See you next time.